Welcome to the Evolving Consensus on Extended Producer Responsibility. We're favored with the support of speakers Neil Seldman, Christine Kubat, and Maurice Sampson to give us some great insights on an increasingly important topic for states and federal government. I'd like to do some introductions first. My name is Gary Liss. I'm Vice President of Zero Waste USA. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm speaking on ancestral lands of the Maidu Indians in Loomis, California. Our first speaker will be Neil Seldman. He's got a PhD, co-founded the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, is director of their Waste to Wealth initiative. He's a leading zero waste and recycling activist, assisting citizen, environmental, and small business organizations in stopping garbage incinerators in scores of US cities. And he works with these cities to increase recovery of materials from the waste stream and grow the local economy by adding value to materials through local processing, manufacturing, and job creation. Prior to founding ILSR, he was a manufacturer of consumer products and a professor of political science. Christine Kubat, our second speaker, is executive director of Recycle Hawaii. Christine was born and raised in eastern Pennsylvania and has lived in Hawaii for the past 40 years. She feels blessed to live in close proximity to her 2 children and 5 grandchildren on Hawaii Island in Hilo. Christine brings a lifetime of experience as an environmental and social justice activist to her current positions for Recycle Hawaii and as office manager for Hawaii State Senator Laura Ocasio. She spends her downtime making art, gardening, and practicing yoga. Maurice Sampson has served as the Eastern Pennsylvania Director for Clean Water Action since 2016. His career as an environmental advocate spans 50 years, beginning at age 15, and the first Earth Day in 1970. I think I met you, Maurice, in the early part of your career when I was in Newark, New Jersey. He served among the nation's first recycling coordinators for the cities of Newark, New Jersey, and Philadelphia in 1982 and 1985, respectively. As a private citizen, he led the Recycle Now Philadelphia campaign, bringing curbside recycling to all of Philadelphia for the first time in 2007. In his current position with Clean Water Action, he drafted the bill and facilitated political support, leading to the passage of the City of Philadelphia's plastic shopping bag ban. He also offered critical testimony minutes before the Westchester Borough Council voted to ban single-use plastics in July 2019. He's also with Niche Recycling, and he'll be our third speaker. We're going to start with Neil and Laura Anthony. It's our Zoom host. Laura, if you can bring up Neil's presentation. It's all yours, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And this is very exciting. Great to be on the same panel with Christine and Maurice, who are really frontline activists. I am in DC, where the Anacostan, the Powhatan, and the Piscataway Indians have had their ancestral lands. My presentation will be a description of how we think, we meaning grassroots recyclers, zero waste activists, can solve problems that can be solved at the local level before they're passed up to other levels of government for administration. And this means using the labor, the capital, the natural resources, including sunlight, airwaves, and raw material that flow through our cities to get the maximum value out of them. I want to say that this webinar discussion will not have much time for audience input. However, if you could please send your questions into the chat, Gary, myself, Maurice, and Christine will guarantee that one of us or all of us will get back to you to answer your questions and carry on future discussions. Okay, this EPR is a very complicated issue. It's evolving, and I must say, I've been very proud to participate and to at times be a leader in bringing the discussion among the grassroots groups, which has literally changed the dialogue on EPR, bottle bills, and other important legislation. We all understand that corporate responsibility for hard to recycle products, dangerous products, is very important. Legislation is needed there. PRO organizations are needed, but we don't feel that that is the same for traditional materials, recycling, packaging particularly, in which there are many players and many institutions and many sunk investment. The bottom line is that the past discussion of EPR and bottle bills is not the same as it is right now, and we imagine that trends will continue to change in the future. Okay, so let me summarize some of the major issues that we've been discussing on webinars, on phone calls, and emails going back and forth. And the bottom line of our approach, when I say our, there is a forming consensus among grassroots groups that have invested time in this. The bottom line, if you want to reduce it to a short phrase, is tax what you don't want, invest in what you want, and ban what is dangerous and polluting. And I think those are the guidelines that community-based groups are looking at to solve the solid waste problem. And here are some of the issues that we've been discussing. Is EPR a polluter pays system, or is it a polluter control system? If it is if it leads to polluter control, it means that a very large industry, the petrol and plastic industry, gets to tax itself and determine how to spend the money they tax themselves. This is very unusual, and it's basically not the way things are done in a democracy. The other issue that is prominent is the industry we're talking about, the petroleum plastic industry. Is it a trustworthy industry? Can we rely on agreements or promises? And then there's the big question in my mind: do we need a product responsibility organization, or can programs such as the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan suffice to get us where we want? And that is to get money to the cities and counties to invest in the infrastructure that's needed to get to where we want to go. It doesn't have to be PRO versus no PRO. There are consensus positions, and this is a position that is emerging among all of the, not all, but most of the stakeholders, and that is EPR with municipal reimbursement, meaning that the industry is taxed, but the tax money, the fees and taxes that are collected do not go to industry to determine how to spend it. It goes to cities, counties, and states where the traditional decision-making is made. We think this is critical because we think that grassroots activity, organized citizens, and small businesses have been the drivers since the late 1960s of recycling, and they continue to be the drivers in the sense that we collectively are providing the mid-channel corrections to the course of recycling, the trajectory of recycling in the United States. Another way of looking at it is who should be in charge in states such as Colorado and Ohio, where the traditional approach has not yielded very good recycling. Should it be the private sector to develop the capacity to recycle? Or should the money collected from industry go to governments to build up the public servants, the training, the skills needed to have a long-term, secure, and efficient public servant system at the local level, local and state level? Another way of looking at this is, do we have a new structure such as the PRO, which is a very radical re-centralization of recycling in the United States, or do we have a a more diverse, let's call it a piecemeal approach, but a concentrated approach that would be based on new taxes that focus exactly where we want them to go. For instance, example, the California packaging tax, the Texas advanced plastic disposal fee, outright bans of recyclables and organics, such as in Massachusetts, Wisconsin, and Vermont, and the Reduce Act that's in Congress, which would add a 20% surcharge on all virgin plastic production. And finally, there's the policy being developed by the Sierra Club, which they're calling the EPR surcharge, extended producer responsibility surcharge, or a national waste surcharge. Whereas the other actions I mentioned focus on plastic, which is the biggest problem, the surcharge is a sui generis approach for making all waste in the country more expensive, and therefore pushing us with economic incentives to recycling. We're particularly concerned about the role of the grassroots organization. As we know, in British Columbia, which is the only place in the North America that has a producer control system, things are not as rosy as reported. One of the major things that we've done in the past year is to bring out the information, the economic and business criticism of that system, which really has been stagnant, and yet it has been proposed as a model. Happily, that model is being abandoned now. As I said, the groups that are focusing on this, such as the Beyond Plastic group, they just had a revision of their Break Free from Plastic bill, which now calls for reimbursement, not producer control. We think this is a major shift where we welcome it. On the other hand, the new revised vision still requires a PRO with a very convoluted system for how they might operate. Another area where we're seeing changes is in the bottle bill. As many of you know, the Break Free from Plastic bill had bottle bill features in it in Congress, and which reflects the general opinion. The bottle bill has been removed, and it is now an independent piece of legislation. And here, the two major issues that are being debated are who controls the unredeemed deposits. Most bottle bills are public, but Oregon has privatized it, and in Connecticut, at the last second, the legislation was moved to give the industries complete control over the unredeemed deposits, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The second issue is refillables. We are insistent that any bottle bill should have a requirement, minimum requirement for refillables if you want to put your product on the market, and we feel that over time, that percentage of required refillables should be increased gradually. One other issue that comes up all the time is what is the impact of EPR on design change of products? From our point of view, we see very little change, and what our feeling is that if producer control was implemented, that the companies wouldn't change their products, they would just pay the fees for producing single stream or single stream plastic, and pay the price and pass it on to the consumer, and therefore there would be very little change. And finally, as brought out by many members in the Sierra Club that we've talked to at the local level, many of the EPR bills are not well thought out. They're copycat bills, meaning people saw it, the legislators saw it one place, they repeated it, they wanted it on their resume, etc. A very good person to talk to in this regard is David Alloway from the Department, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality in Oregon, because David not only explains the law that they passed, but the many laws they passed, but also the reasoning behind them. And as David would say, the Oregon system is a hybrid system that uses many aspects of EPR and many aspects of non-EPR. So these are the discussions that we've been having There are a number of groups that we participate with. And what we're seeing based on conversations with over 50 people within the Beyond Plastics Network, the webinars that we've seen, that the support for the BFFP is broad but not deep. And by this, I mean, when you talk to folks and describe alternatives to the PRO, such as municipal reimbursement or some of the other traditional approaches, they're very surprised to hear that there are all alternatives. So the dialogues have been very, very instrumental in finding out what the groups who support the EPR really want. And when you find out what they really want, environmental justice, grassroots controls, that is why the discussion, thank you, Gary, that is why the discussion is moving forward, and we think we're coming to a consensus. Last thing I will say is that in the past year, we've had great recycling bills introduced in Washington and California, only to be rejected by the legislators at the last minute because they were afraid that EPR was giving too much control to the corporations. And those bills did not pass. And that's very unfortunate because they were very good bills. And the Break Free from Plastic bill is a terrific bill in minimum content, environmental justice, many, many good things, and we need it. We need it desperately. And my fear is that if the EPR discussions don't change and don't move in the direction that I think they're moving, we may not get a bill out of Congress this year, next year, or in the last few years. So the final thing I'm going to end is where I started. We don't think you need a PRO. If you want a PRO, we think it should be a municipal reimbursement, but we think the traditional approaches through the ARIP and the types of taxes I mentioned will help us focus on plastic. We will focus on general waste also, but we'll attack plastic, which at this point is our biggest problem. I would just like to say that this dialogue is going to be continued. The Institute, with support from other groups, is starting in March. We'll have a monthly EPR webinar discussion. We're going to bring in business experts, industry experts, government experts, and grassroots activists. And everyone on this call will get, and others will get invited, and we hope you can participate. And now I'm going to sit back and listen to my colleagues, Maurice and Christine. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Neil. We're going to go immediately to Christine. Christine, if you could share your screen, if you have any slides, if not just a video, and the rest of us will have our videos go away. Christine Kubat.
Unmute.
No slides, and I'm here to say aloha from the traditional home of the Kanaka Maoli, also known as Native Hawaiians to others. And I feel obligated to explain that we here in Hawaii, even if we've lived here a long time like me, we're not considered Hawaiians. We reserve that term for people who can trace their ancestry back to pre-colonial, pre-contact times. So picking up where Neil left off, yeah, what other kind of conversations are we having around EPR? Here's some things that I'm doing here as part of the network involved in EPR legislation in Hawaii. I've introduced a concept called Transitional EPR. I'm going to go to the chat. And I'm going to, oh, I got lost someplace. Well, anyway, I'll send you a link to an article that I wrote that was published in Resource Recycling Magazine. It introduces the concept of transitional EPR. And what does that mean? It's this idea that is based on an observation. I think that there's a miscalculation of what's going to happen downstream in the downstream wastegate once the upstream innovations kick in. So the main idea is like, oh, all this push for PROs, or like we're having to figure it all out. You know, let's just stop for a minute and let's decouple what's going to happen upstream and downstream and really push producers through EPR as we're talking about it now to innovate upstream. This means redesign. This means making a commitment to post-consumer content. And then let's look at what the municipalities can do downstream once these materials that are either reusable which municipalities won't really be involved in that too much. That'll be private sector, but recyclable and compostable. If everything is recyclable, if everything is compostable, I really do believe the municipalities can handle that. So that's the idea of transitional EPR. I'm working with Senator Laura Cascio, who is going to be introducing EPR legislation around that. We're looking at working with the great effort that's being made by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, United Nations Environmental Program, through the Global Commitment for a New Plastics Economy. So if you look at their reports, you see that 16 of the top producers of fast-moving consumer goods are already signatories to the Global Commitment for a New Plastics Economy. That means that they've already made a commitment to move towards packaging that is recyclable, reusable, or compostable. So if they've already made that commitment, why don't we engage them? These are the heavy hitters. These are like when you go out and you collect ocean debris, it's their brands, that's what you're finding. So our idea is to engage them and to get them to pay money into a fund, and then to take that money and send it back to the counties, to the municipalities, and have them do a needs assessment. And this idea for a needs assessment as a preliminary and critical first step came to me through some short conversations that I had with the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance. It's a consortium between Unilever, Mars, Danone, and Nestle. They reached out to me after reading the article in Resource Recycling Magazine. I had a brief interaction with them, and they were very clear that, you know, there needs to be this needs assessment. Like, if we're going to start throwing the money around, what is it for? So that's one different way to look at it. And another way is this idea of zero waste certified PROs. So if somehow we do get railroaded into this system where we're going to have PROs, then perhaps what we as a zero waste community want to do is get in there and start to advocate and say, hey, if there's going to be a PRO, they need to be zero waste certified. And it seems like in talking to Gary and others that this is something that we could do. I mean, maybe it's not our preferred strategy, but again, are we looking at these PROs being there and this extra layer of bureaucracy there in perpetuity? Do they need to be in perpetuity? Is it possible that the producers could take a huge amount of responsibility by innovating upstream, and then for an interim period, kind of as a penance, you know, paying and making sure that the infrastructure is set up? But we see so much investment in infrastructure in the private sector. I'm really feeling like, you know, this idea of committing to PROs, when you look at what the legislation that just passed in Maine, they're calling for a 10-year contract with a single PRO for the whole state. I just feel like that's dangerous, and maybe we're not there. And not sure how much time is left for my slot here, but I would say to anyone who is from Maine or is interested in what's happening there, they passed the bill, now they're going into rulemaking. Rulemaking is really where it all comes down to what's going to happen or not. So please, if you're in Maine, take responsibility for your EPR bill that you folks just passed. Get in there, get involved in the rulemaking, and maybe you could be the ones to come out and say, hey, if there's a PRO, it has to be zero waste certified.
Thank you, Christine. That was really good. We've got 5 minutes left, so we're going to go right on to Maurice. Maurice Sampson, it's all yours. If you'll turn off your video, that'd be great.
Well, good afternoon. And I'm Maurice Sampson. I'm in Philadelphia on the ancestral lands of the Lenape. I see a lot of old friends in the audience. It's great to be back talking trash with everyone again. I was asked to give comments. I have spent all of my career basically here on the East Coast. And the last thing that is taken for granted in the city of Philadelphia is that recycling is something that we all want to see. And I'm talking about from the position of the municipality. It took us 20 years from the time we passed mandatory legislation for recycling to actually get recycling in this city. And between, and we had one administration where we went from 4% to 20%. And in the next administration, we went from 20% and we're down at 8%. I really have a great fear and concern about the idea of introducing a PRO and taking away from any kind of local control of this. There is an assumption I read when I first read the bill that this was going to relieve the municipality of the burden of trash collection. I'm in a city, our waste system is 100 years old this year. It is a city collected program, a unionized program. I can guarantee you that anybody who's going to tell them that somebody else gets to come and control our trash is going to be resisted. It's going to be resisted by the unions. It's going to be resisted by the city. As expensive as it is one of the pillars of power in terms of being in government, and they're not going to want to give it up. And I fear any attempt to try and put this legislation together in the realm of compromises, you're going to lose your intent. Now, seeing the energy and the desire to want to try and resolve this with policy, there are some positive parts of this. We have had the opportunity to get funding in Pennsylvania from a municipal waste fee. And unfortunately, our state legislature has the power to redirect those funds. And so what we once had a great funding source is now being used to fund a whole lot of things other than recycling. I think that it is important as we look at this legislation to beware and to be aware of our differences, and that one size is not going to fit all and is not going to work for all of us. I can already can see that in Philly, if we had it as part of the policy, one that also dictated that the money had to be spent for recycling and that had to be based on a plan that was about recycling, that could be very positive for us. I think if they had dollars and had to spend them in a particular way, that could help. But let's be cautious here. I also just have in general, in the years that I've been involved in recycling, of watching one policy after another when it comes to waste go the other direction. No one talks about it, but one of the greatest pivots that brought plastic into play was the way we wrote the plastic bottle bill in the first place. I was in the city of Newark when that was being written, trying to figure out what municipal recycling looked like. And it was very clear to us that once that bill was passed, it was going to create the greatest incentive to go from glass and aluminum and metal cans to plastic. And when we went and we argued the point, and there was a way of fixing that bill, there was so much interest in simply wanting to win that no one wanted to stop and think about what the repercussions would be. Essentially, we're told we can pass this, so let's pass it now and we'll fix it later. Fixing it later is right now, and it's called the avalanche of plastics that we now own. Let's be careful. Let's proceed with caution as we move forward here. I don't think we need a PRO. I like the idea of taxing the things that we don't want. And if we make non-recyclable, non-compostable, and poisonous items, if we make them more expensive than the alternative, they will disappear. And that's the route I think that we should take. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Maurice. We're basically out of time. I do want to highlight, I thought there was a great discussion in the chat. I highlighted recent discussion with David Alloway and how Oregon rejected the approach of British Columbia where the PRO was totally in charge and relegated the regulated industry PRO to just 4 seats of the 19-member advisory committee. And the total control is in the existing Oregon Environmental Quality Commission. So it's a commission that has a long history of being driven by science, expertise, and doing the right things, and that's who's going to run the system there. And they're going to reimburse both municipalities and recyclers for different portions of the responsibilities. and the PRO is just given very specific responsibilities under that law to implement it. So they called it a shared responsibility approach. And I think that really encapsulates the combination of what Neil is talking about and the concerns that Maurice has highlighted. And if we combine that with Christine suggested on a transitional basis, and looking at where these things come together, I think that's what we need to be shooting for. There's no one single EPR bill. Every EPR bill is different, and many of them have different product policies, like bans, like minimum content, like targets, and it's up to each state to figure this out, what the right blend is. The environmental community is working on a model EPR bill spearheaded by Beyond Plastics. If you want a copy of that, contact beyondplastics.org for that. Neil, you wanted to chime in?
Yes, I just want, in the context of our talks with David Alloway and other people from Oregon, it seems to me that they've taken the approach that we all should take, and that is we want to get to zero waste. So if EPR can help us get to zero waste and anti-incineration, great. But let's keep our eyes on the prize and fit EPR to zero waste, as opposed to trying to put EPR on a structure that won't necessarily get us to zero waste. And I want to thank Rick Anthony and Ruth Abbey for making those points at previous webinars.
Exactly. Any closing comments, Christine? Or
No, just
Maurice?
very excited to continue working with everyone. I feel very optimistic about where this is headed with the guidance of Institute for Local Self-Reliance.
Maurice?
There are many of us leaders. Thank you.
Oh, likewise, I think as long as this conversation remains collegiate, which it has been evolving towards, we're going to get to where we're going to go. There's a lot of very smart people here. We all want the same thing. It's just a question, I think, of not getting in our own way and figuring out how to put something together that works, as opposed to something that sounds good.
Exactly, and I agree with Christine. I want to commend Neil. We've been working on trying to come up with some direction from Zero Waste USA and recommendations since 2013 on this. Neil this year really dug in and started bringing people together in a significant way, and I want to commend you, Neil, for your leadership. I think what you've done has really changed the dynamic in the whole country. And it's not that we're against EPR, it's we want the real EPR to stand up. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So thank you for your leadership. In the chat is a link to the main stage. We're overdrawn on our account. We're supposed to go to the main stage. Just to say the day's over, but there's happy hour, and they're talking about what that is. So find the link in the chat or find your way to the main stage, and hope you had a great conference. I know I did. It's been amazing. It's going to take me a week to absorb it all. So thank you all. Take care. Aloha.